So last week we were looking at the work of Zaha Hadid, and this is a woman who saw her mission as an artist, very much making architecture as works of art. Today we're looking at Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron. The interesting thing is they're exact contemporaries with Zaha Hadid, but they came from very, very different backgrounds. Zaha Hadid from this wealthy and powerful family in Iraq. Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron, ordinary public school kids, from Basel, Switzerland. She goes to the AA in London, this place that's all about the future and amazing new directions in architecture. They go to M.I.T, just solid as a rock architecture school. People with very, very thoughtful and a technical university where craft and making things well is very, very important. It's not surprising that they have very different values, very different theories, and very different directions as designers. So in this talk, we're looking at the work of Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron. And I'm going to go back to a little bit of the format that we were using earlier in the semester of Zaha Hadid didn't really write a lot, and we don't have a lot in her own words. We certainly can see the manifestation of her theories, and she spoke about them. But Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron did write some, and there are a lot of interviews with them. So again, I'm going to kind of use their words to describe values, theories that they had, and then to look at the work in the context of those. So the first issue I think I'd like for us to look at is on this notion of art and architecture. I mean, Zaha Hadid said very overtly, I'm an artist, I make art, that's what my architecture is. Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron did not believe that. So this is a quotation from one of their writings. They said, "We believe that architects cannot do art. As much as we love art, as much as we are influenced by it, as much as we try to use it on and with our buildings, we do not try to make our buildings into art." So that they saw a very different role for art and for architecture. And in some ways, they saw architecture as a somewhat higher calling, a more demanding kind of discipline, where other things had to be accomplished, as well as kind of visual stimulus or things that art is known to do. So the first building I want us to look at is a very early building by them. This is, by the way, Jacques on the left in the big image and Pierre on the right. Pierre on the left, Jacques on the right. These are both relatively recent photographs. They're now, in their early 70s. So this is the Goetz Gallery that they did in one of their very early buildings, one of the first buildings that anybody knew of Herzog and de Meuron. And it was for art. So I think it's appropriate to see, okay, what is their attitude toward art here? And what's the relationship between art and architecture? So this was done for a very, very prominent art collector who had an incredible large art collection. It had grown out of the house. It was much bigger than she could accommodate in her house. And so they're making a little museum, a little private museum, actually in the front yard of her house in Munich. And so this is it's a gallery for the display of art. And so they're trying to make a building, not a building that is art, but a building that just makes the very best environment possible to highlight the art. In this slide, we're seeing Jack Blanton, for whom the Blanton Art Museum on our campus is named, Jesse Height, who was the director of the Blanton Art Museum, and that's Pierre de Meuron right there. And this is when we were searching for an architect for the Blanton Museum. Some of you may know that Herzog and de Meuron were selected as the architect for a new Blanton Art Museum on the UT campus in the late 1990s. Unfortunately, the regents ran them off, and after, that's another story for another time, But it was a really sad situation where we could have gotten an incredible, incredible museum. They did 2 different designs, and then did a series of 12 sketches of designs, and the regents didn't like any of them. And so finally they just, they left the project. But this was in the heady days when we were looking for an architect, and we were visiting buildings all over the world for the architects that were being considered, and in the end Herzog de Meuron were selected for that. And so we were looking at the Goetz Gallery here, and as I said, at this point they didn't have a lot of completed work, but you could see their attitude toward art, which, because UT was building an art museum, we were very interested. What is their attitude toward art? And it's kind of the opposite of what Zaha Hadid was making a piece of art for that museum. Instead, they're very much making a place where the art will shine, and the building is there to serve the art. And that was very appealing because the Blanton Museum had a wonderful collection. The collection needed to be a significant piece of what you experienced in that place, and not the building kind of foregrounding the art that was inside. So that's very much what the Goetz Gallery is. It's a beautifully crafted building. It's made out of birch wood through here, and then this beautifully detailed milky glass. It's in the middle of a birch forest. You can see those birch trees. And so they were trying to use the same wood as was in the forest there. It's from the street. It's very self-effacing, very simple little building that sits behind a wall. And then between the building and the house is this garden space that's there for sculpture as well. Now, the remarkable thing is you'd never suspect the section of the building from looking at it from the outside. That is the second story that is gallery space with top light. And then there is a bottom story that goes deep into the ground here, the same dimension, and you have gallery spaces, and this is the light that goes into those galleries just like here. So the building is really kind of half again as deep down here under the ground, and it's stacked a gallery below and a gallery above, both with that clear story light. So it's in Munich. It's in a residential neighborhood. It's really just, this is the woman's house that has a lot of her art collection in it, and the gallery went in the front yard right there toward the street, and now there's a garden between the two right there. But a very simple rectangular building in plan. Underground, there are some extensions that go out for utilities and for a little storage area for art. But there you can see the section where there is a gallery with a clear story window. And on the lower floor, there's a gallery with a clear story window. And then there's stairs that take you up to a mezzanine level, because the mezzanine level for the lower floor is the ground, and that's where there are some of the offices and the entries at that level, and then the stair connecting those. Now, that section was like that, where a good bit of the building is below the ground for some very good reasons. I mentioned in the last talk that they were very interested in energy conservation. They were birthed as architects in the 70s when there was an energy crisis. And so they were interested in passive solar heating. So it's down below the ground, and they're using an earth-air heat exchanger where they use the warmer temperature of the ground to heat the building. So partly by putting it in the ground, that gives it some temperature stability. But they actually have air that is warmed through the ground and then just heated a little bit more and sent into the galleries here, so that they can get it from, maybe it's 20 degrees outside, which it frequently is in Munich in the wintertime. Well, the ground here is 60 degrees. So they can get it up 40 degrees by that means, and then they just boost in another 6 or 8 degrees to get it comfortable inside the gallery space there. So it's that earth-air heat exchanger in the section of the building, and how it interacts with the ground has everything to do with energy conservation. This is what those gallery spaces look like, both on the lower floor and on the upper floor. They feel quite identical. And you can see that it's about no baseboards, no patterning, everything as neutral as possible so that the art, which in this case is very subtle bits of art, can be resonant. And that's what your attention is drawn to. So it's a space for art, all about the art, and only very, very quietly and subtly about the architecture. So that's an attitude toward art and architecture. Another thing and another issue that they deal with is this whole notion of materials. They're all over materials. They love materials as a generating factor for architecture. They say, we're trying to expand the role assigned to materials in traditional usage by changing their form and making them available to a new manner of perception. All materials interest us in the same way. When one speaks of materials, it always depends on how they're joined together, in what manner they're used, and so on. So obviously in the Goethe Gallery, very interesting material usage with that birch paneling and the very sleek glass that's very ephemeral. In this next building, a pharmaceutical building in Basel, this is their hometown, and in fact, their office is just right over here. So it's a stone's throw from their office, right near the river in Basel. And in this particular neighborhood, which they knew extremely well, there were all these little clumps of green. And that's one thing that's nice about that neighborhood is you have your normal European fabric, which is very, very little green, but this one has tons of little pocket parks around. And on their site, there was a little pocket of green here, but it didn't creep out to the street. So the idea was to take that green and make the green extend out to the street. And so they're thinking, well, what materials do we use to do that? And they use this green fritted glass, and they actually use then vines as well. But the green fritted glass is very, very beautiful, just sensual material. Something you would not have thought of glass having this kind of presence as a material. But it's got a dot pattern in it, and at the corner here where you're seeing two layers of glass go back, you can see that kind of moire pattern when one dot pattern plays against another dot pattern. But that's happening all over the building because it's about an 18-inch space between the glass and these outriggers that hold it up. And then the skin of the building is actually an insulated panel here, which also has dots on it. And the dots on the insulated panel and the dot frit on the glass are the same pattern exactly. So as you're looking at it, you're constantly seeing this play between the two dot patterns. And that gives a kind of active liveliness to the glass and a depth to the glass that's really quite extraordinary. Now it also is, of course, doing a big thermal job. So the sun is shining in here and it's heating up that area in the wintertime, and it's creating a nice blanket of warm air outside the building. So all the way around the building, instead of trying to heat the building to 68 degrees as against 20 degrees out here, instead they've superheated this blanket of air via greenhouse effect to that's probably 65 degrees or something here, and maybe they don't even have to do anything to keep the building temperate in the winter on the inside, or some extreme days they would heat it some. So again, it's passive solar. They're using the glass for technical purposes. They're also using the glass for this sort of rich visual purpose. Here the glass is on a courtyard on the inside where they have water on the floor of the courtyard, and they have lily pads, so there's sort of green dots on the water and the green dots in the frit, and you can see it even in kind of glass on the soffit there. All the way through the building, this dynamic, moving, interesting glass. And it really does blend the building into the surroundings and make it fit this neighborhood of green pockets and feel really warm and gracious and beautiful in that context. But again, the generation of the big architectural idea, the solution to the problem, is coming from taking a normal material but using it in a very innovative way. That's a very strong idea they use over and over. A third idea they deal with is more generally natural forces. So they say, we believe that architecture should merge more with life, to merge the artificial and the natural, the mechanical and the biological, because it would result in better architecture for people to live in. There is an extraordinary potential for architecture which is technologically more advanced and which adapts to the sun, to the warm and cold, to the noise, like an organism. We believe that in the long run, biology will provide better adaptive solutions than mechanical technologies. So what can we use in the natural forces of the sun, of the wind, of sound? How can we use those to really make magic in a building? How can we use the soils? How can we use the landscape, the topography, all of these natural forces? How can they be used to shape architecture? And a building that really depicts this well is the Dominus Winery in Napa Valley in California. This is the Napa Valley. There's a row of hills running here, and behind us there's a row of hills. You can see the bottom of them right here. In the middle is the Napa River running like that, and alongside it is some of the most fertile and beautiful soil for growing grapes anywhere in the world. The Dominus Winery is right there. It's a long, thin building running with its long faces north to that ridge of hills and south to this ridge of hills, so that it's letting the topography, the geography of the area set the direction of that long, thin building. It's also letting the solar orientation with the long faces north and south, short faces east and west, ideal for solar orientation and for passive heating and cooling in this climate. So that it's the geography and it's the sun that is telling them exactly where the building sits, and its long faces north and south, its short faces east and west, facing the hills on both sides like that. And as you look from the highway like this, honestly, I drove by about 3 times before I actually even could find it. It's low and thin. It's a huge building, but the texture of it and even the color of it is kind of sympathetic with the hills and the texture of the hills, and it seems to almost disappear. So it's very much a part of the landscape, very much a part of the geography of that area. And then it also reflects very strongly the vineyards. So the vineyards also are running with their long faces north and south, so they can get the maximum south sun through the winter time. And so that is the perfect solar orientation for them and the perfect solar orientation for the building too. Again, technically superb. They're buying this land, and it's so precious because of the soil. They put very, very little impervious cover, only a little drive to take you to that sally port. Otherwise, the building just sits right in the field with the grapes going right up to it. And the grapes are all held up, of course, by wire armatures. That's what makes a vineyard. And the building is actually made of gabions, which is a wire armature with these rocks that are actually local rocks, the kind of rocks you take out of the field when you start to till it for the vineyards. And they become just a part of the building instead of a part of the landscape there. And they're being used technically in many ways. The hot sun hits the rocks, that heats them up, and the warm air rises through that porous layer of the rocks. And then it creates a breeze that draws the air through the building, all around. So it makes it able to, if you have a shady space with that air movement, it's very, very comfortable anywhere in the building with no heating and air conditioning. And because this is a pretty salubrious climate, many of the spaces that are real active spaces are outdoors. The passageways are all outdoors. They're outdoor conference rooms. So this is the second floor and office areas, and there's very little, you can look at the ceiling, very little ductwork. There's not really that much heating and cooling. Mostly the building is taken care of in a totally passive way. And that's true in the more technical parts of the building as well. This is not a snooty winery where you go and do wine tastings and it's for the tourists. Not at all. In fact, tourists can't go there. It's strictly an industrial production facility. So they're processing the wine in these tanks, and then they're putting them in wooden kegs, and they're aging the wine there. And in both environments, they need a very stable temperature. So the building is all about keeping that stable temperature. And of course, one incredible device for doing that is high thermal mass. So if you can get, like in a cave where wine was kept originally, that high thermal mass keeps a stable temperature and resists the diurnal swing of warm during the middle of the day and cool at night. So those thick concrete walls that we're seeing around here, as well as the gabions on the outside, are providing that very, very high thermal mass that gives great temperature stability to the aging room here, to the processing room there, and to all of those parts of the building that have to do with that greater temperature stability. Then up here, where we're getting the offices, then those walls thin up, the concrete is gone, we don't have the gabions anymore, we have large openings, and that's where you get these open areas that are passively heated and cooled and ventilated, and with beautiful views out to the vineyard. There you can see that massive wall down where these kegs are, the thick concrete, and then the gabions on that, keeping that great thermal stability. And then above it, where you have the offices, the whole wall is gone, and it's a completely different thermal situation. The gabions are a very odd material. I mean, this is them exploring materials in an incredible way. Gabions are usually used for like retaining walls in a very utilitarian kind of way. But here they fit the agricultural environment very beautifully. They inexpensively get the high thermal mass that's needed, and they create a beautiful texture to the building. And from the inside, this amazing light quality of the light coming through those gabions to some of those upstairs spaces that we see right there. So again, it's about taking natural forces and using them. It's the soil, it's the sun, it's the orientation, it's the geography, it's heating and cooling. All of those natural forces are what's really making the architecture. So another issue that's very prominent in Herzog and de Meuron's work is a reaction not just to natural forces in a natural context, but to urban forces in an urban context. And again, let me read a quotation from them. They say, "It's important to us to find the right architecture for each place, which, if possible, is then completed by the city. We have no desire to set up a new establishment, but on the contrary, we want to pursue existing inceptions in order to complete the city, so to speak." So the idea is that you're not starting from scratch in a city. You're making the next step in that city. And in the case of the Tate Modern Museum at Bankside in London, it was a situation where they actually had an existing building. So that's the urban fabric that was there. And they started with this old industrial building. It was a power plant. And it was again a competition, which they won. All of the other entries in the competition made radical changes, busted open those walls, made big changes to the old power station. But Herzog and de Meuron left it almost completely intact. They put a little extension on the top that is about the cafe and administrative offices and some other things that needed more light and air and view. And they also made some minor surgery at the bottom to open up to gift shop and to make a little more direct interface with a public plaza that they created at the bottom down there. But for the most part, they left the building just incredibly intact. While all the other star architects were out there pushing and pulling and manipulating the building, their attitude was, we let the context speak for itself, and if it's doing good, we just leave it alone. And so these interventions were very elegant and very beautiful. The really big move was they took the turbine room in the back of the building and took all the big turbines out and then made it an incredible atrium space that gave you views up into all the galleries here and became a place really where you could make art as well. And artists are regularly given the room and asked to make a piece that's commissioned for that room. So again, a beautiful example of how they took that context and they just ran with it. They let it tell them where the project should go. Then 6 or 8 years later, that museum was super successful. It then spawned, that's the museum, it spawned a lot of development all around it, just immediately. Condominium buildings, office buildings, got to be a smart part of town, cool restaurants, cafes, so suddenly that became the place to be because of the Tate Gallery moving in. And the Tate decided to expand. And when they expanded, again, Herzog and de Meuron are making a building that is very sympathetic to the context, the original building there, but now matching more the scale of the new development that's around it, so that they're letting the building grow out of a reaction to the city and an engagement with the city. There it is under construction with those other new buildings around it. But now it's able to get up and get some views, make the connection even stronger back to St. Paul's on the other side of the Thames. And that becomes kind of seamlessly woven into the galleries on this side in the old Bankside building. Now a bridge across that atrium space and into the new building on the other side of it. But seamlessly growing out of, just evolving out of the city and becoming a reflection of spaces in the city that then become a museum and an engagement with the interior of the building as well as with these ideas about the context there. So is it new and fresh and different? Of course it is. Is it also like a sibling, like a kind neighbor? Of course it is. And those things are not incompatible. And Herzog and de Meuron seem to have an incredible capability of doing that. Now, that's at Bankside in London. I want to show another example that's a little bit different way of approaching that at the Walker Art Museum in Minneapolis in the United States. This is a very strong, very interesting building. This is them going crazy with materials again. The skin here, this is of course northern climate, lots of snow, and they were kind of inspired by, again, natural forces. But how could we make the skin of the building almost seem like snow, like the texture and like the irregularity, but still the uniform whiteness of snow. So it's an incredible sort of mashed up metal panel that's got perforations in it that gets reflection in very different ways, different angles, and makes a beautiful skin for the building. But we're talking about context here. So how did it grow out of a context? There was an existing Walker Art Center here that was a very distinguished building by Edward Larrabee Barnes. Edward Larrabee Barnes was a very famous American architect in the 1960s. And this is one of his very best works. It's made of this very characterful Nebraska iron spot brick. There's a beautiful sequence of spaces on the inside. It might not be our taste at the moment, but man, in the 1960s, this was a killer, important building by a very important architect. That's a little different than Bankside, which was an old power plant. So instead of mimicking that building, they very respectfully take the base of that building and make a base for their building. They look at the tower of that building and they make a tower for their building. They engage the park in the back in the same way it does. They engage the street in much the same way it does. They take it as an urban building, very much as a generator for the new building. But they make a very clear distinction between this is the jewel that was done by Edward Larrabee Barnes in another period. And we're not trying to be Edward Larrabee Barnes or do that. We're going to be a really good neighbor. We're going to have a really nice dialogue. And we're going to take little moments of that and thread it into the building, but it's not going to be a kind of seamless extension or replication. So that's how it sits in the city, just at the edge of downtown Minneapolis, with this park in the back that both buildings spill onto. Both buildings engaging with the park there. And the lower portion of the building, just like the lower portion of the old building, and the tower, just like the tower of the old building. And then inside, taking all those rich white colored materials, but combining that with that Nebraska iron spot brick. So they take the same flooring material from the old building into the new building. So there is a kind of seamless journey inside between the two buildings. And that becomes a major feature on the inside of the new building. They are so clever with the use of ornament. In this case, a little bit of whimsy and flourish. This is a concrete wall going down to the parking garage where they just put a form release on the concrete formwork that creates this same pattern that's on the inside of the building in a very kind of subtle way. Again, they're doing many of the things we talked about, incredible material usage, incredible use of the forces of nature. But in that case also, a little bit different take on the way they use the urban environment to generate architectural form. Okay, the fifth issue I want us to look at is on this notion of integration, of how you take all the pieces of architecture and you synthesize them. So they say, we are not particularly interested in either structure or ornament or space as such. Things start to get interesting when you bring these elements together in a single thing. And if you can experience it by moving through the building, by using it, when you integrate them into a whole, it's easier to make them reappear. So the idea is that you don't focus on structure, you don't focus on ornament. You're doing all these things concurrently in a way that the whole adds up to more than the sum of the parts. You get real synergy in that. And I think a great example of that is the De Young Museum in San Francisco. This is the building that right after they got run off from UT and did not do the Blanton Museum, they immediately got the commission to do the De Young Museum in San Francisco. And that building was completed in short order, and Time magazine called it the best building in America of the 21st century. An extraordinary building in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And I just want to talk about a couple of examples of this notion of integration. So how do you make 1 + 1 = 3? How do you do two things at once and integrate them? And I want to focus for a minute on the tower. So this was, the bulk of the galleries are through here, but this was a kind of extra programmatic thing that the architect suggested. And it really was multiple things happening at once. It was an effort to get a spectacular view up at the top up there. Because when you get high on this site, which is on the top of a hill, and you're in Golden Gate Park, so there are no buildings around, you can see kind of 360 degrees and get a spectacular view. And that would be a big asset as a calling card for the museum. But also, that's a sculptural element. I mean, it's that twisted, amazing form. They're certainly aiming for form in that case. But then also, it actually is technologically very, very appropriate. So here we see it, and it's kind of a shapeshifter as you move around different sides of the building. You see it in different ways, always with that gallery at the top that's getting the spectacular view. But then this structure is slipped around like that in order to give it lateral stability. It's in an earthquake-prone area. If you just made a long, thin rectangular box in the short dimension, there would be a weakness that in an earthquake might give way structurally. So they actually twist it to make it so that there's not a short dimension of the building there, that it's resisting loads in multiple directions. It's really dealing with those lateral loads that are vulnerable in an earthquake. So it is structure, its form, its space, its view, its function, but all of those things happening at once in one kind of strong, synergistic gesture. I think the skin could be looked at the same way. This beautiful copper skin that is sort of sheathing the entire building. It's both perforated and dimpled. Dimpled to give it greater strength. Perforated because sometimes you want ventilation. It's used to cover air intake areas for the air conditioning equipment. And then it can get sort of denser and thicker and not be there for intake in the air conditioning equipment. It's sometimes used for shade. So you can see here there's 2 layers of it, and it's giving a wonderful dappled light, a soft light down below. So it's used for sun control there. It's used for sun control on that window right there. So the skin is doing multiple things at the very same time as it's being a beautiful wrapper and sort of unifier for the building. It's also being a sunshade, a way of getting ventilation for the mechanical systems. So that's what they're saying, that when you integrate all of these issues, that's when architecture really gets interesting, and it begins to be more experiential. So it's a simple rectangle in plan. You go into a little courtyard here that then takes you to the main lobby space. You can go over here and go up in the tower or in a grand stair to the galleries from there. There you see it sitting in the park. That's it, with this huge park all around and spectacular views to the Golden Gate Bridge here, or out to the Pacific Ocean here, or back to downtown San Francisco over here, across the bay. So that building gets these spectacular views all around. And from that upper gallery, all of that is displayed to you. You can see across to a building by Renzo Piano, which is the Science Museum adjacent to it. All the way through the building, there are these little courtyards that are giving light and giving a little vegetation and visual relief in parts of the building. So you're constantly getting that relief as you go through the galleries and through the lobby as you pass through the building. And it has an amazing variety of galleries. There's a very eclectic collection. It's traditional art, as you see here, and it's contemporary art, as you see here. And the galleries are very, very different in response to that. This is an architecture that takes many, many, many different points of view and finds solutions that integrate those various points of view and bring them all together and make a solution that does 5 things at once. And in their mind, as they say, that's when architecture gets really interesting. So another issue they're interested in is the kind of visceral impact of architecture. They say we're absolutely anti-representational, The strength of our buildings is the immediate visceral impact they have on a visitor. For us, that's all that's important in architecture. We want to make buildings that can cause sensations, not represent this or that idea. So the idea is not for the building to be didactic or to make you think of something. It's really meant to be a powerful experience. And so I think a great example of that is the Bird's Nest, this Olympic stadium that they did for the Beijing Olympics in 2008. And you can see in that this incredible web of sunshade all the way around the outside. And then inside that is the stadium itself. That is structure. It actually is holding the thing up in a diagonal way rather than a more orthogonal way. Inside, there's the big arena, a magnificent, huge Olympic stadium in there, again with shade because it was a summertime event and it's hotter than hell in Beijing in the summer. So there's this kind of tent space that covers and shades the spectators. And all of that is just that kind of web that you can see reflected onto it. But a spectacular, amazing experience. So now they don't have a whole lot of big sports events in China. They don't play football or soccer or any of those things. But when I was visiting there, they had the music from the Olympics. And on the big screens, they had images from the Olympics. So this was years after the Olympics. And they still were playing that music. And in that space, it was spectacular. It was really uplifting and thrilling. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Chinese, very few international people, but Chinese who came to visit and to relive and to rethink the glory of the Olympics when they were in Beijing. The concourses around the outside are spatially fantastic, but also really just their structure. Something like the handrail there takes the same pattern as the structural system does, and does it in a very vivid, bright color along there. The light fixtures even, they have that same kind of tent-like quality to the sunshades on the inside. But it makes a spectacular, dynamic, memorable image that really creates an experience of moving up and around and through the stadium, an experience of seeing it from the outside. And as I said, now it's not used so much as a stadium. The swim center has been turned, or the aquatic center from the Olympics has been turned into a kind of water park. But this one is just used for people to visit, and occasionally there's a rock concert or something like that that's in there. But it's an incredibly powerful and important landmark in Beijing. And something, the evening of the day I was there, probably 10,000 people came out and were just strolling around the area around it. It's lit up quite spectacularly. You can see people just memorializing their visit to this place. But they have managed to make a really amazing experience, not meant to remind us of any particular thing or era of architecture or any architectural reference. It really is just about an extraordinary experience of being in that stadium and at the Olympics. Okay, a final issue. Herzog and de Meuron are very interested in regional differences, how they express different places. They say, unlike other architects and town planners, we do not believe that globalization is taking us toward a generic city. Cities are moving toward the specific, but not in a romantic sense, one in which every city would have its own character, existing autonomously in an unchanging world, different from other cities. So the idea is that we're not aiming toward generic rules, generic cities, generic buildings. Instead, each place has the ability to have a specific architecture that's responding to it. And I want to show two buildings that I think exemplify that beautifully, two quite recent buildings. One is the Parish Museum, which is on Long Island in New York, kind of at the end of Long Island. That's the Parish Museum right there. It's a relatively rural area, an area that has a lot of potato barns and barns in that area. And in some ways, the parish is just this big, simple, utilitarian building for displaying art. And it sits out in a big green field, and it has these simple gabled roofs. It was quite an economical building to build. Not like anything else in their work. That's one of the things I'm just blown away by, is the range of their architecture. They just don't repeat themselves. This one feels just perfect on Long Island. It reflects that place. It has a kind of eccentric farm quality to it, where buildings are just made the way they make sense to be. And this was just a long, simple volume there with big outdoor porches for outdoor events, because in the summertime, which is when Long Island is really alive, they have all these summer residents that come out, and that's really when the art museum is most lively. And they have these big porches where events can be held there. And that's very much a part of a regional identity, an identity of that place of being outdoors and enjoying the summertime in particular. The very casual, not fussy kind of museum environment. The natural woods, giving it a kind of rural feeling to it. Lots of wood exposed. The concrete work, not fussy concrete, but rough and ready concrete, utilitarian kind of concrete. And you can just walk by and see the administrative offices. It's not a pretentious museum at all. It doesn't separate the staff from everyone else. And as you move through the museum, it's lovely. The art looks spectacular on the walls. The light is gorgeous, but it's very simple. The scale is magnificent. You really feel like you're in an important place, looking at important art. And this is a museum that actually does have quite a good collection, a place to, where you can relax and you can sit and you can enjoy the art in a comfortable way, not a kind of snooty museum where you're herded through. And then lots of places for little kids and an enjoyment of art in very different ways. So I think that has everything to do with being in a kind of rural environment, being on the end of Long Island, being in a place where summertime is the most lively part of the year, and where you can be outdoors and enjoy being outdoors. All of those things are what are generating the Parish Art Museum. Now, super different from that is another art museum. They're doing it virtually the same time, the Perez Art Museum, and this one is in Miami. So that's where the parish is. This is Miami Beach down here, and the city of Miami over here. That one is a Zaha Hadid tower that is under construction when this photograph was taken. And this is the Perez Museum, right on the water, looking out to the bay. And I think very much about Miami. Lots of shade. It's hot in Miami. So the whole building is surrounded by this great trellis and lots of greenery that's growing up and down. Miami is a tropical wonderland, green and soft. And so the art is integrated in indoor and outdoor environments that are in this very, very tropical feeling place. The vegetation goes up and into the building constantly, and there's always shade. And then it also has a lot of natural materials, which you find in tropical areas, teaks, and again, a kind of informality, the palm trees and banana trees and vegetation, very appropriate for that region. And then as you move up into the building, lots of casual places for a casual lifestyle there. This is a kind of amphitheater area there, and then there's little amazing like hammocks and play areas and so on. Places for kids and places for adults who want to act like kids, but lots and lots of outdoor environments that look out to this beautiful view of the bay. And there's a cafe, a couple of cafes and places to eat, places to gather, places just to hang out and relax. Beautiful kind of local materials, the shellstone concrete and the teak wood. But everywhere this sense of being in Miami. And in every detail, and the kind of weathered quality of that wood, which works very well in a nautical, an environment with salts in the air. The wood weathers beautifully. And then a kind of lifestyle that goes with that, of being outdoors. And I'll have to say, the day I was there, the eating places were packed full of people. They were having the best time ever. All those outdoor spaces, the kids were playing. It was a really wonderful, lively environment. Unfortunately, when I went into the galleries, well, there were a few people right at the front door, but then pretty quickly, there just weren't that many people in the galleries. But again, maybe that's Miami. It's more fun to be outdoors and in the sun and at the beach and, by the water than it is to be in a gallery space like that. But again, it's so much about the building being a part of its place, being a part of its region, being a part of the city that it's located in. And saying that cities are not generic, but they're very particular. Now, again, in class, we'll be discussing these ideas. How much do you agree or disagree with these directions that Herzog and de Meuron feel like generate the architecture they do? So let's have that talk in class. See ya.